All right, Nuggets fans, welcome into Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by good friends here at Mile High Sports. I am your host, Ryan Blackburn at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, part of the Mile High Sports Podcast Network, and I am here. I am ready to discuss the Denver Nuggets, though through the lens of a massive injury, surprisingly massive injury that happened, or at least the notice happened earlier today. Recording this on a Monday night, late Monday night, should be up Tuesday morning for everybody. A big deal that Fred VanVleet of the Houston Rockets tore his ACL, according to Shams Charania. He was likely to miss the entire season. I'd be shocked if he came back any sooner than June, frankly, but I don't expect now the Houston Rockets to last that long until June. It's an unfortunate reality for them. They are absolutely in an unfortunate situation because of it. But we're going to see how it changes the Western Conference. I'm going to talk about that in this particular podcast, in this particular episode. We'll talk about the most essential Nuggets and kind of through the lens of what would happen if one of them went down for a season like Fred VanVleet just did for the Houston Rockets, a massively important player for them. And also, could the Nuggets actually survive a Nikola Jokic injury, and if so, for how long? But let's start with Fred VanVleet, who has always been captain underrated, part of the underrated squad that, he contributes to winning. There's no question about that. Has always been an unheralded player for various teams that he's been on. But so Toronto for 7 seasons, became the starter there basically in year 3. And then in Houston, each of these last 2 seasons, he's helped that team grow up. Basically, he's been their Paul Millsap. He's been somebody that, as the Nuggets can attest, helped you grow up, helped you learn how to win, learn what the process is like. And for a team that had Jalen Green, no longer has Jalen Green. Team that had Kevin Porter Jr., no longer has Kevin Porter Jr. That team needed to grow up. And the combination of Fred VanVleet, Ime Udoka, that has been tremendous for, and you could even add Dylan Brooks before his trade to the Phoenix Suns for Kevin Durant. It helped the Houston Rockets become better, become a team that was respected, but for the right reasons, and not a team that could be taken lightly at any way, shape, or form. When you think about the Houston Rockets, and Nuggets fans, if you think about the Houston Rockets from this year, you're thinking about, okay, Alperen Sengun last year, Jalen Green's going to take a lot of shots, Dylan Brooks and Jamal Murray going back and forth, Amen Thompson, super dynamic athlete, player like that. And then you're just thinking toughness, defense. You don't necessarily think of Fred VanVleet first, but you should. And the big reason for that is because he just sets the tone for everything that they do. And after trading for Kevin Durant, he was going to kind of go back into a role as a secondary, even tertiary creator for that team that made a lot more sense for him. He's a smart, high IQ player. And though he's undersized, I think listed at 6 feet tall, was an absolute bulldog of a defender, somebody that is super high IQ, kind of like a Mike Conley type, where like even during his late stage career, Mike Conley has not been a great defender, but during a prime of his career, he was absolutely contributing to the grit and grind Memphis Grizzlies. Like, that was a massive factor for that team, just to have a point of attack defender that you could trust. Fred VanVleet was that guy for the Houston Rockets. He was the guy that chases around Steph Curry. It wasn't Amen Thompson. It wasn't any of these other guys. Like in that series that went to 7 games, it was Fred VanVleet being the adult in the room that did so much for that team. So it is a massive loss. It's one of those things that Nuggets fans might kind of gloss over because, hey, it's not your team. It's somebody else that's not in the public eye consistently in Fred VanVleet. But this is a big deal. This does shape the top of the Western Conference, because I think the way that many people were talking about the top of the West, especially after Hey, you trade for Kevin Durant, you add Dorian Finney-Smith and Clint Capella. If you are the Houston Rockets, you're going to be a contender. You're going to be a team, especially after you were the second seed last year. Nobody really took the Houston Rockets seriously last year because of their top level talent. It wasn't because of Fred VanVleet. He was doing everything that he could. But it was because guys like Jalen Green, Alperen Şengün to a certain degree, they weren't seasoned enough. They weren't veteran. They weren't tried and tested. Fred VanVleet is. He helped win a championship for the Toronto Raptors back in the day and has been a tremendous player for a long time. So I think that this is a big deal. And you start to look at the Houston Rockets, who traded both Jalen Green and Dillon Brooks, along with a 10th overall pick for Kevin Durant. They got bigger. Dorian Finney-Smith added to their size and their length on the perimeter, but he's not really a guard. He's more of a wing, maybe even a forward. Tari Eason is a forward. Jabari Smith is a forward. Kevin Durant is a forward. Amen Thompson is a guard, is kind of a wing, but he's not a shooter. He's not somebody that has been a traditional point guard before. He was eased into the role that he's been playing for the Houston Rockets, in part because they had guys like Fred VanVleet to kind of stem the tide and not put him into difficult situations immediately. Reed Shepherd, the guy who they drafted third overall, should be a player that steps up here, but he was bad last year. He was not ready, and I think that there is a real world where he's just never the kind of player that they need him to be, although this is the perfect catalyst for them to try to do that. So I do think that if I was thinking about the starting lineup and what I would do if I were the Houston Rockets in this case, I'd probably start Amen Thompson at the point and just go super big. I'd play Kevin Durant as the de facto point guard and then have Dorian Finney-Smith, Tari Eason. Actually, it's Dorian Finney-Smith and Jabari Smith Jr. and Amen Thompson. And then you have, of course, Alperen Şengün as kind of he's almost a point guard on the floor and a point center on the floor, if you will. So there is reason to believe that they could survive this during the regular season, but it does affect them in the playoffs. According to FanDuel, we'll just kind of look at their win totals for now. The Rockets' win total dropped from, I think, 54.5 to 52.5, where you could go over or under that number if you're a bettor. The Nuggets' win total, by contrast, has increased. It went from 53.5 to 54.5, and the over has plus odds. It seems like they're kind of juicing the under a little bit to kind of compensate for the fact that they rose that number by one. But the Nuggets, I think, benefit from Houston not being at peak form. It doesn't mean that they'll take care of business. It doesn't mean that they're going to sweep Houston or anything like that. But last year, the Nuggets went 1-3, I believe, against the Houston Rockets. It was either 1-3 or 1-2. Actually, no, that's not true. They were 2-2. They won a game in March, I believe, that Nikola Jokic did not play. Jamal Murray played a really good game. And then they won game 82, which Houston wasn't, they tried for a couple quarters. Denver tried for 3 quarters of that game. It wasn't really a real game, but it gave Denver some confidence heading into the playoffs, that's for sure. But Houston the year before was a team that Denver went 1-3 against, I believe. They have struggled with Houston's athleticism, with their defense, with their ability to capitalize on any of Denver's mistakes. Fred VanVleet was a big part of that. And now if you're Denver, Houston becomes just slightly easier to defend because they don't have the vertical threats anymore. They have a whole bunch of pressure on the interior. But Denver's a team with Jokic in the middle, with Aaron Gordon, with Christian Brown, with hopefully Cam Johnson, Jonas Valanciunas, Bruce Brown, some very tough players on the interior. Denver should be fine to survive that kind of style. Whereas the perimeter-oriented teams that can spread you out and force Denver to guard away from the rim, those can be really tough. So I'll be interested to see what happens with this and kind of in a regular season perspective, how Denver matches up with a team like Houston. Does Houston add a new point guard? Do they go call Russell Westbrook? Do they try to add Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant to the same team? That seems interesting. I wouldn't do that if I were them, based off of like the fit with Russ. I mean, he would help and just be a guy that can create some offense for other people, but it's not going to fix their spacing issues. They're going to have some issues. They're going to be a defensive minded team, to be clear. So maybe they could survive it, especially in the regular season. But there's a lot of layers to that, and especially kind of getting back in with Kevin Durant would be very, very interesting. So I'll be tracking this. It's going to be very interesting. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about re-ranking the West contenders. Very curious to see how it goes. But first, this message from ZipRecruiter. This podcast is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. Are you just waiting for the right candidates to hire? Well, the future looks brighter than ever in hiring because ZipRecruiter's latest tools and features help speed up and find the right people for your roles, so you save valuable time. And now you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/audio. With ZipRecruiter's new advances, you can easily find and connect with qualified candidates in minutes. There's no hassle waiting for the right people to come find you. You can see a candidate that you're really interested in. You can unlock their contact info instantly. Use ZipRecruiter and save time hiring. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. And if you go to ZipRecruiter.com/audio right now, you can try it for free. Again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/audio. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. All right, we're back. Pickaxe and Roll. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Would really, really appreciate it. Let's re-rank West contenders. This is going to be, I think, an interesting conversation, as like you would expect Houston to kind of drop off now. There's a very limited opportunity for them to replace Fred VanVleet. It would be like if Denver lost Cam Johnson, just lost him for the entire season. I think that's, if like Jokic would be one thing, like Jokic is the equivalent of Kevin Durant for them. Jamal Murray is the equivalent of Alperen Şengün for them. Aaron Gordon is the equivalent of Amen Thompson for them. Obviously, those are more important individuals for sure. But if Denver lost Cam Johnson for the entire season, that would suck. That would be horrible. You think about how much that would impact Denver from a rotational standpoint, from a positional standpoint. There's so many things. Denver would be so weak at the wing spot, the forward spot, that they would have to really adapt. They'd probably have to make a trade. And the same thing can be said about Houston without Fred VanVleet. So they have taken a tumble. According to FanDuel, they are in a pretty bad spot from the West. They're still 4th in the odds for winning the Western Conference at plus 950. But that was much closer to plus 500, plus 600 before. This is Vegas basically saying, hey, we don't think that they are actually going to be very good in a playoff context, or at least a good enough bet against some of these other teams that they're going to flourish. They're not. OKC leads those odds at plus 135. That is short odds right there. Denver has improved to plus 480. They were probably closer to plus 500, plus 600 as well. And then the Lakers have improved to plus 850. So Rockets are now fourth in the pecking order in the Western Conference odds. And that's not really a surprise to me. It's going to be interesting to see how Houston can adapt. Are they going to just go full defense? Are they going to go full big? Will their point guards be able to make up the difference? It's not just Amen Thompson, who really is like almost has the skill set of a power forward in some ways, but he's a jack of all trades type, and they're filled with those kinds of players. But usually when you have those kinds of guys, you need somebody to stir the drink, and it puts a lot of pressure on Kevin Durant. And like Kevin Durant's never been one to be super healthy later in his career. He's probably going to miss 30 to 35 games, 20, 30, 35 games. Like that's going to be a pretty tough thing for him to do now that he has to carry more of a heavy burden. And I wonder if that negatively impacts them from a playoff perspective. They would have hoped, I assume, that Kevin Durant could rest up and not have a massive burden that he has to fill it heading into, like, what is this, year 20 for him, basically? I mean, Kevin Durant's been in the league for a long time. Fred VanVleet would have helped kind of set the table for him. Now is Kevin Durant going to have to create all his own shots, all of them? Like, we knew he could do it before, but the question is, do you have to do it all the time? And so Amen Thompson will have to step up. Reed Shepherd will have to step up. Aaron Holiday on their team will have to step up. It'll be very interesting to see whether they could do that. But if you're Denver, the matchups now become very interesting. Jamal Murray will be going head-to-head with somebody like Amen Thompson, who will probably guard him for much of those games. Dorian Finney-Smith could take a turn. Jabari Smith Jr. could take a turn. But Kevin Durant doesn't have to guard a whole heck of a lot. He would probably stay on Christian Braun, who I wrote about earlier today on Monday. You should make sure to go check out that article on milehighsports.com. It's all about Christian continuing to grow as a starter in the NBA and as a starter at the shooting guard spot. Amen Thompson's a player who has a lot of those same issues. He doesn't attempt a lot of threes. It's never been part of his game. Houston as a team doesn't attempt as many threes, and Kevin Durant, despite the fact that he can take threes, is not going to push that forward. So they're going to have to win with offensive rebounding, inside the arc efficiency, bludgeoning you to death, and defense. Like, that's the way that they're going to have to win. Can they do that? We'll see. We'll see what it looks like. I'm curious to see how they handle it. But I think if I'm Denver, you've got to know that you're going to go to war. It's going to be a tough physical series, but it would be like a 5-game series. It would be maybe a 6-game series. I don't think that this is one that goes deep. It's probably not one that goes 7 games, because if you have an answer, it's just about doing the hard thing over and over and over again. I don't think that Houston is going to be as adaptable as they need to be. And part of that was true with Fred VanVleet as well. He's not a transformational player by any stretch of the word, but how are they going to get another guy that's as good as him all around? I think it's a fair question. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, OKC is still king in the Western Conference until proven otherwise. Denver has the best chance to attack them. And then I actually kind of think that the Lakers, I know that it's shaky and like Minnesota's still up there. They probably deserve some credit too. For whatever reason, their odds are not as high as Houston or LA. Actually, I know the reason. It's because they are the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Lakers are the Lakers. But I do think the Lakers, with the players and the talent that they have, they still have opportunities to make a trade. They're still matching contracts that they can put together. It'll be interesting to see what they put together, but it does seem like they have the third best path to win the Western Conference. I don't think that they will, but Luka Doncic could be the best player in any series that he plays, and LeBron James could be the best second option in any of the series that he plays. So we'll see what it looks like, but I do think it's OKC, Denver, the Lakers. I'll keep the Rockets there for now because I respect Kevin Durant. I know that there's not a lot of people that do at this stage, and the Rockets being in this situation, it's now pretty jarring, and we'll see whether they can even overcome this and whether they could even survive to get into a playoff context. They're going to have to fight through a very tough Western Conference, and teams below them, like I'd put Minnesota at 5, I'd put Golden State at 6 probably. Maybe there's another team that I'm forgetting. There definitely is another team that I'm forgetting. Oh, the Clippers. Oh, yeah. How does anybody evaluate the Clippers at this stage? Like, is Kawhi Leonard going to finish the year with them? Like, probably, but is that even a good, like, he's fine, but like there was a report that they no longer consider building around Kawhi Leonard to be their top priority, and that they are kind of shifting priorities away from him. I think that came from Jake Fisher of the Steinline. So that's pretty well sourced. And just another factor in this Western Conference. Now, two major stories that hit right before the NBA gets going for sure. You've got the aspiration situation with Kawhi Leonard, and now you've got a torn ACL for Fred VanVleet, both on the 2019 Toronto Raptors championship winning team. Interesting. Okay, let's take another break. When we come back, we're going to talk about who the most essential Nuggets are and whether the Nuggets could survive a Nikola Jokic injury and for how long. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Nuggets, or Pickaxe and Roll. Good Lord. Here's Delete Me. Pickaxe and Roll is brought to you by Delete Me. Delete Me makes it easy, quick, and safe to remove your personal data online at a time when surveillance and data breaches are common enough to make everyone vulnerable. Data brokers make a profit off your data. Your data is a commodity. Anyone on the web can buy your private details. This can lead to identity theft, phishing attempts, and harassment. But now you can protect your privacy with Delete Me. As someone who has a very active online presence, privacy, it is really important to me. Podcasting in public, being around a whole bunch of people, but more than ever, just getting online in a situation where the world is just very complicated right now. It's very important to feel protected, and Delete Me helps with that. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me, now at a special discount for our listeners. Get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to join deleteme.com/HIT and use promo code HIT at checkout. The only way to get 20% off is to go to join deleteme.com/HIT and enter code HIT at checkout. That's join deleteme.com/HIT, code HIT. All right, back at it. Pickaxe and Roll, definitely Pickaxe and Roll, and not Locked On Nuggets this time. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hit that like button, folks. Hit that subscribe button. Would really, really appreciate it. Let's wrap up this show by discussing the most essential Nuggets. So we talked about, Fred VanVleet, probably the fourth most essential Houston Rockets player. He might even be third over Amen Thompson, although Amen does give them so much oomph and just juice with the athleticism that he provides, the Swiss Army nature of his actual play style. Although now that they have Tari Eason back healthy and they have Jabari Smith in a better situation and they added Dorian Finney-Smith, like they do have a lot of guys that can fill some of the Swiss Army traits that he has. But now they just need somebody who can run some pick and roll, and Amen Thompson could potentially do that. We will see whether he's capable. But for Denver, their most essential players, I think, are pretty clearly defined in the pecking order. And I've been going through this on Mile High Sports, where I've been basically writing in reverse order, a rotation kind of capsule, a preseason preview, preseason profile for each of the players on the roster. I went from the open roster spot, the 15th man, to 14th, Hunter Tyson, 13th, Jalen Pickett, and so on and so forth. And so now let's kind of flip that in reverse. Let's talk about who the most essential Nuggets are, that if they were to go down for a prolonged period of time, the Nuggets would feel it the most significantly. First is so clearly Nikola Jokic. There's no doubt about that. He is the all everything for the Nuggets. Now that they have Jonas Valanciunas, they might be a little bit better positioned to survive without him. Although, let's be real, it's just the overall transformative ability for him to completely take over a game in so many ways and to manage the game in so many ways. It doesn't just have to be his scoring, his passing, his rebounding. He can make a key defensive play. He can turn things up and really choose when or how to make the important plays. That is a skill that very few players in NBA history actually possess to the degree that Nikola Jokic has. So he is by far the most important, the most essential Nugget. And then second is Jamal Murray. I know that there is some consternation about that with Nuggets fans. There are a lot of folks that would say Aaron Gordon. Denver, when we've seen what happens when Murray goes down and the Nuggets have to try to replace him. They are a first round exit. They are a team that cannot get out of the first round, really. And, well, they did against a flawed Portland Trailblazers team, I'll say. They did have Michael Porter Jr. for that. But, like, you know what the ceiling is when Jamal Murray is out. With Aaron Gordon, without Aaron Gordon, I still think that Denver could get to a second round appearance, could get to a conference finals. He would obviously be extremely missed in that situation. He would still be, I think, the third most important Nugget, the third most essential Nugget. But the Nuggets only had him for 51 games this last year and still won 50. They have the foundation. The foundation of the team is Jokic and then it's Murray. Gordon is so clearly third on that pecking order, though, that like just having him in that trio, it really helps Denver kind of in all situations. So Jokic is 1, Murray is 2, Gordon is 3 in the most essential Nuggets rankings. I think you got to go Cam Johnson at 4. Although Christian Braun, I think, will have a strong case for this. The reason why I don't have Christian Braun at 4 and I have him at 5 is because you look at the positional scarcity for the Nuggets. Cam Johnson is one of the only real floor spacers that the Nuggets have in their front court. While Aaron Gordon has really he's evolved, he's changed his game, he's been better. I still don't see him as a high volume 3-point shooter that can space the floor and take away the pressure that the other Nuggets face. And if Cam Johnson were to go down, then you probably have Peyton Watson starting in his place. Maybe you move Christian Braun to the 3 and you start one of Bruce Brown or Tim Hardaway Jr. or Julian Strawther or somebody like that. Julian Strawther, I think, would actually make some sense just so you keep the bench mostly intact from what I think will be a very essential bench unit for the Nuggets. But I think that the actual shooting and spacing and potentially dynamic secondary creation for Cam Johnson, something I'm going to write about on Tuesday that'll release just alongside this episode. I think that'll be interesting, and it's something to monitor. I'm curious to see net ratings and lineup combinations and whether the Nuggets can be good enough without Jokic on the floor and how much Cam Johnson has to do with that. There will be a lot of interesting layers to that conversation, but we will see how it evolves. We'll go to the next 3 guys. So you've got Jokic at 1, Murray at 2, Aaron Gordon at 3, Cam Johnson at 4, Christian Braun is at 5. I still think he's more essential than any of the bench players for sure. Jonas Valanciunas might be 6, although if we're doing regular season versus playoffs, regular season he is 6. He is more important than Bruce Brown in the regular season, I think, just because you want to make sure that the non-Jokic minutes are the best that they possibly can be. And the most influential player on that is going to be Jonas Valanciunas. If we're doing it from a playoff perspective, then I think you have to go... you probably have to go Bruce Brown. Like that's the call there. And then from a playoff perspective, Tim Hardaway Jr. or... Tim Hardaway Jr. or Peyton Watson. I'm going to go Tim Hardaway Jr. I think that in most of the lineups that Denver's going to end up playing with the playoff groups, I think that you're going to see more small ball from Denver, where Aaron Gordon is the 4, and then Cam Johnson moves to the 4 rather than Peyton Watson coming in, and you play 3-guard lineups like Murray, Christian Braun, Bruce Brown, or Murray, Tim Hardaway Jr., Christian Braun, or Murray, Bruce Brown, Tim Hardaway Jr., something like that. I think you're probably going to see more of that than you will see Peyton Watson, but that might not be true. Like Peyton Watson averaged over 24 minutes a game for the Nuggets in this past year. I think if we're doing a regular season context, Peyton Watson is 7. But I think from a playoff context, he's 8. Playoff context, you would have to go Bruce Brown, Tim Hardaway Jr., Peyton Watson, Jonas Valanciunas, because you need the guard help, you need the perimeter help for sure in those situations. Jokic is going to play 40 minutes a game in the playoffs, no matter how good Jonas Valanciunas is. So the hope is that he has 8 great minutes, or maybe it's 10 great minutes if they overlap a little bit. But for the most part, I think Denver has to be great because of the Jokic minutes and not because of the Valanciunas minutes. And that's why I think this final question is important. Can the Nuggets survive a Jokic injury? The context of that is important. Jokic has very rarely gotten injured to the point where like he's actually out for a significant period of time. He's had moments where he's been out, like he was at the birth of his second child, his son. That was during November of this past year, and Denver was pretty poor during that time. They looked pretty shaky, and you could already see a lot of the issues forming around that because Jokic was gone. And then there was a stretch of games during March where he was out as well for a prolonged period of time. And I think that Denver went 2-2 during that stretch. It was actually a pretty tough stretch. So could have been worse. But Denver overall has never been very good with Jokic on the pine. And I think that's probably not going to change, despite the fact that they have a little bit better of a situation now with Valanciunas there, with Cam Johnson providing a little bit more playmaking instead of Michael Porter Jr. And there's just, I think, a better structure and a better feel for this upcoming season. So if Jokic were to sit out 10 games, let's say that's 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks, I would say. If he were to sit out for that long, then you're probably looking at a record. Par for that situation, I think, would be 4-6. Like, okay, it's not that bad. It could be worse. You know the teams are going to struggle. You're not expected to really go 500 without the best player in the world. It would be nice if you just kept it at 500. Par in that situation is 4-6. So if Jokic were to miss 10 games, he only plays 72, then going 4-6 in those non-Jokic games is not bad. Now, if you miss 20 games, then you started to get into that situation where teams can really game plan against Jonas Valanciunas and his strengths and weaknesses as opposed to Jokic and his strengths and weaknesses. And that's where you really start to get into the questions of what happens behind Jonas Valanciunas at that point. Who plays backup 5? You're probably looking at Deron Holmes. There would be some Zeke Naji there. There would be some Aaron Gordon there and some small ball looks. But I don't think that that's a great situation. And the fact is that Jonas Valanciunas is not a 25 to 30 minute per game player anymore. He's a guy that could do that in a pinch, but he is relatively older. I believe that he's 34. Let me just fact check that real quick. I don't want to age him unnecessarily. Jonas Valanciunas is 33. My mistake. He will be playing his age 33 season. So you don't want him to have to play extensive minutes. He's not a super mobile guy. He's dealt with injuries. He's just a big bruising player. And that style of play is very difficult. It's why most centers don't play the amounts of minutes that Jokic just played. So I think that you're looking at probably 24 to 25 minutes with him. And then you have to piece it together with the rest of the team. And if Deron Holmes is ready, then great. That's a tall task for a guy coming off of an Achilles injury. So it'll be interesting to see whether they could sustain it. How much resources would Denver be able to put out there? Like, is Murray going to get tired? Like, he's going to play 36 minutes a night trying to make up for some of this difference. Cam Johnson going to do the same thing. That's a lot. So I think if Denver were to go 8-12 during that time, basically 4-6 multiplied by 2, that is a pretty reasonable outcome. But then you start to realize, okay, 8-12 is not a great stretch. If you go any worse than that, 7-13, 6-14, you start to really lose ground in a playoff race where Denver, I think, is hoping to win 55 plus games. So we saw the over-under via FanDuel was 54.5. So 55 wins, I think, would be a pretty successful season for Denver. They don't have to get to that place. They just got to be top 3. It's harder to be in that upper echelon if you don't have enough games from your best player. Because the Nuggets are not going to go, like, if Jokic were to play 62, they're not going to go 45-17 in Jokic's games played, I don't think. So if you go 8-12 in those games, and then Jokic is 45-17, then you're 53-29. That's pretty good. That's a pretty decent outcome for your year. It's not 55 wins, but still pretty decent. So if you're staying at 8-12 in those non-Jokic games, then so be it. But when you start to get down to Jokic playing 60 games, 58 games, 56 games, 54 games, 52 games, you really start to lose the thread, I think. So because that, like, it's going to be harder for Denver to maintain a 40 to 50% win rate in those games, depending on where they're at in their schedule. But it's going to transcend that. Like, it's going to be tough. Brain's not working at this point. So I'm probably going to shut it down here. But I'm curious to see what Nuggets fans think. If Jokic were to miss 25 games, he plays 57, he misses 25, what would you predict Denver's record to be in that case? I think there's a lot of people that say, yeah, Denver would win 46. They'd win 45. I'm not sure if it's that low, but it might be. It's never happened before, so Denver's never had to deal with it. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully that's never something they have to deal with ever. All right. That is going to do it, folks, for this episode of Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends at Mile High Sports. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button on the way out. I'll be back with you guys on Thursday.